UFC Fight Night Sacramento is here this weekend. Actually starts tonight. Guys, I'm sorry this video is so late. I haven't had a chance. Dropped my son off at 3 o'clock. Had technical problems. Managed to get it done. So I'll quickly run through the fights for you and get this straight out for people to watch. First up on the fight card, we have Chanel Dyer versus Elise Reed. We have Elise Reed, 8-5, 33 years old, 5'3". And we have Chanel Dyer, 7'1", 25 years old and 5'6". Elise Reed, not the best record in the UFC, not the most active fighter in the world, and she's not really good anywhere. This will be her last fight in the UFC for me. She has been finished 5 times in her 5 losses, which in the women's division is not a good look. She gets subbed, she gets KO'd, and these are all bad signs against, she's 33, but she looks closer to 40. The way she moves looks very stuck in the mud, very slow, and she's fighting Chanel Dyer, who, 7-1. And, I know she's been rocked a couple of times in her fights, but this girl is savage. I like how she comes forward. I like how powerful she is with her strikes. And she's had 7 wins, and all 7 wins have been finishes. And I love to see that in the women's division. And what I can see here is just Chanel just being too much, too quick, too good on the feet, too sharp, too powerful. The only way for me that Elise Reed can win is if she gets her takedowns. But I just think that Chanel's going to be too powerful and will light her up on the feet and get a second round TKO. Next up, we have... it looks like an advert for shampoo, doesn't it? Look at it. Look at these two. Wes Schultz, Jackson McVeigh. Wes Schultz, 9-3, 30 years old, 6'1", against Jackson McVeigh, 7-2, 27 years old, 6-4. Now, Wes Schultz looked absolutely horrendous in his fight against Damian Pinas. Now, we know how good Pinas is, but it looked really worrying that he was in the UFC, the way that he got dealt with. And then in his last fight, he looked terrible again. And he basically only won because he fought someone who's fought 6 times in the last 10, 15 years, who was dominating him and then just gassed out, and Wes Schultz got the Hail Mary submission. But from what I've seen of him, he's either sub or bust, and he hasn't got the striking. His takedowns aren't great. He normally just manages to reverse position. It works against low-level fighters, but in the UFC, he looks absolutely horrendous, I'm not going to lie. He's facing Jackson McVeigh. Again, came at the UFC short notice with an unbeaten record at the time. He lost to Bruno Ferreira. Then he lost to Zach Reese. But then he came out in his last fight and got the submission win over Cedric Dumas. I know a lot of people beat Dumas, but he dealt with him quite handedly. And what I love about Jackson McVeigh is he's a finisher. At the end of the day, he's good everywhere. He has a very sneaky submission game, can use the wrestling if he wants to, but mainly what he likes to do is do his damage in the clinch with knees, with elbows, and I just think he's going to be too powerful for Wes Schultz here. I looked at them in the weigh-ins. There's a huge height difference, and I just think that he's going to be a lot more physically strong than Wes Schultz, and Wes Schultz has no game plan when he struggles to get the takedown. So I think Jackson McVeigh will probably stuff the first takedown, and he'll finish Wes Schultz. I think it'll be strikes. I think he's going to get the first round knockout, but it wouldn't surprise me if he got a sneaky submission when Wes Schultz dives for the legs, and he might get guillotined or something like that. So I do think Jackson McVeigh. I'm going to go Jackson McVeigh round 1 finish. I'm swinging towards KO. Next up, we have a good fight. We have Gage Young, 11-3, 26 years old, 5'9", against Stan Dawsonville, 5-0, 7 his age isn't there, sorry. So 5-0, he's 5'9". I haven't put his age on there. I think he's about 26 as well. So sorry about Find My Artwork guy. It's me who does it, sorry. So basically, Gage Young, solid fighter, decent everywhere, came into the UFC, had a couple of rough performances, didn't look great, and then he got a decision win over Thiago Moises, which would have looked great a couple of years ago, but Thiago Moises is on his way out now. Just the thing is with Gage Young, although I do think he's a really complete fighter, I just don't think he's dangerous. I don't think he has, the one-punch knockout power, a very sneaky submission game, or top-tier wrestling that he's going to separate him from anyone. I just think he's going to be, your lower-level UFC fighter, And I think eventually he'll be used for fighters on the way up. Similar to what this is, like Dawsonville, I've watched videos of him, and he looks, really good on the regional scene. He's also unbeaten in the amateurs, and what I like about him, and I said about the other fighters, I like people who go out to finish. And I watched his last fight against a British prospect, and he dominated him, and he was giving him it, swearing at him. It was like he was behaving like Josh Hockett in there. He was goading him, just dominating him, and it didn't matter where the fight went, he just controlled him. And I do think Dawsonville is probably the better fighter technically in this matchup. However, he's taking this fight on short notice, and he is very explosive. I could easily see Dawsonville, getting a first-round finish. But what I can see, and I think Gage Young's tough, I can see Dawsonville maybe hurting Gage Young, piling it on, and gassing himself out because Gage Young's tough as nails. I think because he's took the fight on short notice, second and third round, I think Gage Young will, take over the fight, manage it, might mix in the wrestling as well to slow Dawsonville down. And I think Gage Young will get the unanimous 29-28 decision. Next up, I don't know why this fight's happening. We have Ryan Coos, 9-2, 32 years old, 5'8", against Marcio Barbosa, 18-2, 28 years old, 5'6". Start with Ryan Coos. I watch a little bit of his footage. Very average fighter, average record. His losses aren't great, but he is very aggressive. He's confident wherever the fight goes. He's decent on the feet. I've seen him actually do bare knuckle MMA as well. So he's got that ruthless streak in him. But I just don't think he's technically that good. I think he's very aggressive, but that's going to be at a detriment for him. I think he'll make a lot of mistakes, and in this matchup, I don't think he can. Barbosa, obviously, lovely record that he has, but this guy is a killer. He's a finisher. He's not just knocking people down. He's knocking people out, leaving them spark out, like he done to... Bicodjo or whatever he's called, Sterling's teammate. Obviously, that's not a great look because he loses a few times, the guy that he beat. But I just think he's got the X factor, the touch of death. And I think what will happen here is Ryan Coos will be I think it'll be a crazy minute. I think it'll be a very crazy minute where Coos comes at him, maybe tries and shoots a takedown, makes things scrappy. But then as soon as it settles, I think he's just going to walk onto a big shot by Barbosa. So I'm going to go Barbosa by knockout round 1. Next up, we have Nasrat Hakparas, a.k.a. Skinny Kelvin Gastelum, 18-6, 31 years old, 5'10", against Chris Padilla, 17-6-1, 30 years old, 5'9". Chris Padilla should be 18-6 without the one here. In his last fight, he got a draw against Markel Medeiros, who's on this card a little bit later on. And Padilla won that fight for me, to be honest. He had a very harsh point deduction, which I don't think he should have. And Padilla he's a guy in the UFC who always comes in. He's always an underdog and he always performs. He's had some really good performances. He's beat Jai Herbert. Obviously, I thought he beat Medeiros. And then he obviously hit that elbow on Rongju, which made his eyes swell up. And, Rongju's not a bad fighter. He's facing Hakparas here, who, is a decent striker, has a little bit of wrestling, but primarily tries to keep it on the feet. Hakparas has had a few up and downs in the UFC. He looks decent sometimes against the low-level fighters. And then, obviously, he's got head kick knockout by Salkild. It's one of these where I always think when a fighter gets knocked out that bad, they're never, ever the same again. And I think that's what's going to happen in this fight. I think he's going to be a little bit more cagey. And I think it would make sense for Padilla to maybe throw a few of them head kicks, because it'll just make Hakparas think, oh, I've been knocked out before. And I think that's what's going to happen here. I just think Padilla is just going to outdog Hakparas. I think he's got the better gas tank. And I think, maybe Hakparas wins the first round with cleaner striking. But then I think Padilla will, turn it up in the second and third round, mix it up with the clinch work, his boxing. And I think he'll take over and get a 29-28 decision. Hopefully he doesn't get robbed here. Next up, we have Kennedy Nzechukwu, 14-6, 34 years old, 6'5", against Gaziev, 14-3, 36 years old, 6'4". Now Gaziev obviously came in the UFC with a bit of hype, got pushed straight into a main event after he'd knocked out Martin Badé. Obviously, Rosenstruck just beat him until he quit. He literally quit in that fight, and then, you know, his last couple of fights, he hasn't looked great. He's been getting finished, and quite brutally as well. Gaziev is very aggressive. You know, he's got decent power in his hands. He is quite slow, and he does have wrestling and ground and pound, but he literally, for me, he only has a gas tank for a round and a half, and this is where it could come unstuck for him. Kennedy Nzechukwu, you know, when he's winning, he's normally winning against low-level opponents, and as soon as he steps up anywhere, he just kind of doesn't have a game plan, and his output is a lot smaller. He's looked great in some performances, and then he's looked terrible. The consistency isn't there with Kennedy. However, in this fight, I think Kennedy's got to survive round one, because I think if he survived round one, that's when Kennedy thrives. When it comes into round two, he can start, you know, popping the jab, knees to the body, you know, good clinch work, and he has a good pop in his hands. He's quick, isn't he? He used to be a light heavyweight, so he's going to be a lot quicker than Gaziev. I think in the first round, I think Gaziev might sting Nzechukwu because he starts slow, or he might get a takedown on Nzechukwu. But I think when round one ends, I think Kennedy's just going to be the fresher fighter, and I think he'll break down Gaziev slowly in round two. It might be a late round two finish, but I'm going to go round three finish for Kennedy Nzechukwu in this. Moving up the division, one of my favourite fighters. So we've got Jamal Emmers, 22-8, 37 years old, 5'10", against a gunslinger, 14-5, Le'Veon Douglas, 31 years old, 5'9". Emmers is a decent fighter. You know, he is good everywhere. Good wrestling, decent striking, sneaky jiu-jitsu game. It's normally his fight IQ that lets him down. He should really be about 22-6, but his wrong decisions in his fight has probably cost him a few of his wins. Jamal Emmers, you know, he's not been that active recently, and I think this is a horrible fight for him to take. Le'Veon Douglas, on the other hand, is a guy who his record isn't pretty to look at, and it wasn't. You know, he's on a 5 or 6 fight win streak, so you got to think he was like 9-5 and stuff like that. He looks like he's really, you know, adapted his game, and he started using all the tools, and his tool is his power. You know, this guy is hitting people and they are wobbling all over, or they are going down unconscious. In his last fight, he destroyed Arosa. Every time he threw out that jab, Arosa was wobbling, and it basically led to him getting the finish. It was just every time he hit Arosa, he was in trouble. Game plan wise, I think Emmers needs to try and get the takedown, but I just think that if he even tries and entertains a striking with Le'Veon, I think as soon as Le'Veon hits him, it's over. So I'm going to go Le'Veon Douglas. I'll go end of round one knockout. Next up, we have a heavyweight fight, which Anthony Wint has been forced into this card. He only fought 2 weeks ago, I think it was, on Dana White Contender Series. You know, blasted out the guy within a minute, I think it was. So Anthony Wint, perfect record, 7-0, 30 years old, 5'11", against Terence Chapman, 5-1, 29 years old, 6-1. I try to watch a bit of footage on Chapman. Looks a very basic fighter. I'm guessing that his agent is an agent with some other fighters in the UFC and has managed to get this guy on the card. Chapman is very low level, very average striking, wrestling, no real jiu-jitsu game, a bit of a punch bag if I'm honest. And I think he's been just brought in here to be a fast night for Anthony Wint. You know, the heavyweight division is severely lacking, and I think what Dana wants here is, you know, someone who bursts on the scene with a highlight knockout, win really, really quick, and they can, you know, kind of force him into the rankings. I think that's what will happen here. I think Wint will win easy. I think Wint will win quick, and I think Wint will probably win by knockout within a minute or two. If there is a minute line, I think it's well worth taking it, you know, gone in 60 seconds or whatever the market is. So yeah, Wint round one knockout. Next fight, one of my favourite women fighters on the card is Carly Jedice. 6-2, 27 years old, 5'7", against Gisela Chavez. 7-0, 29 years old, 5'6". Chavez to start with, you know, 7-0 record. It looks pretty on paper, but it's very low level competition. You know, a lot of these people have more losses than wins. And then she came at the UFC and she's scraped by Duben. I know Duben is known for having one of the best knockouts ever in the women's division, but is really, really poor standard, and she went life and death with her. Whereas Jadais, who also, I know MMA math doesn't work, guys, I understand that. Jadais fought Duben and just murdered her. Absolutely murdered her. Jadais, I love watching her. She's 6-2, but really, it's like I said it the other week. I said it with Trajan Gore. Like he's not a 6-4 fighter. If you're honest, I know that's his record, but if you look at the caliber of Trajan Gore and the people that he's beating now, he should be about 12-4. Carly Jadais is the same. She should be 12-2, for example, because she's that good. She's made a few mistakes in other fights, but her striking is beautiful, and what I love is how aggressive she is. She's great for the women's division. She's a lovely southpaw with great kicks, great boxing, and I just think she's too good for Chavez. And I think in the second round, she'll just absolutely batter the life out of Chavez. I think Chavez will be a mess by the end of round 1. Second round will come out. I think she'll take a few unanswered shot, maybe a body kick or something. She'll go down, and Jadis gets a second round knockout. I'm really looking forward to this next fight. One of my favourite fighters, Mason Jones. I think he'd be a lot of people's favourite fighter. Really exciting. Mason Jones, 18-2, 31 years old, 5'10", and he's facing Markel Medeiros, who I mentioned earlier, 11-1-1. Medeiros is a pretty striker. Likes to stay on the outside, has nice boxing, nice kicks. He's got a draw, but that was because of the point deduction in the Chris Padilla fight. Padilla would have won that fight without the point deduction, which was very harsh. Medeiros, very tidy fighter. I do like watching him, but I don't think he's a dog. I think he's one of these guys, wants to win pretty, hopes to get a knockout or a leg TKO knockout, but ideally, not normally, he just cruises to a points decision. I think, especially at this level, that's what he's looking for. He's looking forward to just win. Mason Jones is relentless. And I think if Mason Jones is really serious now about what he wants to do in the UFC, he uses all of his tools. In this fight, he needs to mix up his striking with the wrestling, the jiu-jitsu throws, the ground and pound, the submission attempts. He needs to really wear on Medeiros, because Jones' gas tank is fantastic. He can keep going, and I don't think Medeiros can. It's one of these fights where I do think Mason Jones wins via decision. I think it might be ropey first round, where he might get his leg chewed up a bit, and he might get, out jabbed. But I think the second, third round he takes over, mixes everything up. He could be in line for a late finish. It's something that I might look at. But I think Mason Jones will be just too much for Medeiros. He's a proper dog, and I think he'll win 29-28. Moving up the card, we have Renier Derrida making his light heavyweight UFC debut against Roman Dolidze, who's gone back up to light heavyweight. Dolidze, 15-5, 38 years old, 6-2. Dolidze is decent everywhere. He's got decent striking, decent pop in his hands. Doesn't really use his wrestling much, even though he is a good wrestler. And he has a very, very good jiu-jitsu game that he hasn't really used. Dolidze looks like he's really slowing down. He looks every part of 38 years old, and that was at the middleweight division. He got absolutely destroyed by Anthony Hernandez. And I think moving up to light heavyweight, I just don't think it suits him. The way he got ragdolled there is worrying, especially when he's coming up against Renier Derrida, who I know... Thing is with Derrida had a great start to his UFC career. He went life and death with Robbie Whittaker, and I picked Whittaker to win that fight. And then obviously, the thing is with Derrida, he's a very, very big, he's a big light heavyweight. Like you saw him on the scales, he looked phenomenal. And he was trying to lose weight 3 or 4 times in a year, and you just can't do that. Not when you're his side. And he said it in his interview, most fighters will do 2 fights a year, but he wanted to fast track himself to the world title. So he kept taking every fight, and I think it killed him in the end. Against Allen, he did quit, but I think he was just purely exhausted, and then apparently he was really poorly after that fight. Then he lost to Barallo as well. But Barallo is just good everywhere. He's not really he's not going to knock you out or anything like that, but he's just decent everywhere, and I think Derrida couldn't cope with that. But I think in this fight, this is where Derrida, and he mentioned it in one of his interviews, he's going to go back to his roots. What got him to the dance, and that is his ground game. That is using the wrestling after the strikes. I think he'll use some heavy body body kicks, knees to the body here to begin with. He'll initiate the clinch. I think he'll easily get the takedown on Dolidze. It just depends if Dolidze can defend Derrida's submission attempts, but Dolidze made a mistake and got his head ripped off by Anthony Hernandez, and Derrida is better at jiu-jitsu than Hernandez. So I think it's going to be Derrida. I think Derrida in the second round will. I think Dolidze will just make one too many mistakes and he will get choked out by Derrida. So I'm going to go Renier Derrida, second round submission. Next, and the core main event of the evening, we have Sergey Spivak against Vitor Petrino. Spivak, 18-6, 31 years old, 6'3". Now, Spivak he's one of them fighters on his day. He looks great, and then sometimes he looks terrible. You know, he hasn't got the best striking. He does possess a bit of power, though. But his main thing is his wrestling and his submission threat off his back, or when he gets him to the floor, is really, really good. And that's something I'd like to see him use here. You know, Spivak, he got that, recent win over Tybura where he subbed him dead early, and that doesn't really happen to Tybura, if I'm honest with you. Petrino, on the other hand, obviously came up from light heavyweight because the heavyweight division has no one. And at light heavyweight, he got choked out by Anthony Smith. Bad luck. He got knocked out by the Hanyak. Justin Jacoby, which is not a good look either. And coming up to heavyweight, I do think it's a matter of time. You know, he got hurt badly by Asplund in his last fight, and I think he just managed to get through that. And that wasn't that long ago, I don't think. So, Petrino's coming in this fight, and I just think he's very chinny. Petrino, he has great striking, and I think that's what's going to get him the win here. I think if he wants to win this fight, he's going to have to just keep it on the feet. Keep the striking going, and try and knock out Spivak, which I could see happen. Spivak's been knocked out a few times, especially against explosive heavyweights who move quick. That's when Spivak struggles. For me, I think Spivak, if Spivak comes with the right game plan, he wins this fight for me. I think using the wrestling and then tiring on Petrino, I think he could really, snatch up a sub pretty much like Anthony Smith did. I think that is there. However, I've flip-flopped on this, and I think I picked Spivak on my TikTok breakdown, but I just think he really struggles with strikers who are very explosive for the heavyweight division. So I'm going to go Petrino round 1 knockout. Now for the main event, we have Anthony Fluffy Hernandez versus Gregory Rodrigues, Robocop. Robocop is 19-6, 34 years old, 6'3". Facing Hernandez, 15-3, 32 years old, 6'0", 6 foot, sorry. Obviously, Rodrigues is a guy who has fantastic jiu-jitsu, yet on his professional MMA record doesn't use jiu-jitsu or has submissions. The guy is an animal. I've never seen a middleweight hit as hard as he does, to be honest. I think that he really, really hurts people and knocks them clean out, as we've seen. However, he does struggle with people that can hit back and have power, and then people that can extend him. Hernandez, what he's great at is obviously this pressure, the wrestling, mixing the striking, the wrestling up, the ground and pound, the submission attempts, really breaks his opponents. He doesn't normally threaten the submission in round 1. He tries to drown them, and then round 2, 3, etc. Then he really hunts the finish when he knows that they're a sitting duck. And I think this, I've heard people saying it, I do think it's one or the other. I think it's either Hernandez drowns Rodrigues in round 3, 4, 5, or I think Rodrigues could knock him out in rounds 1 or 2. I'm actually swinging, and because of, I do like Hernandez, but in this fight, he's fighting someone who's bigger than him, who's probably stronger than him, someone who has the jiu-jitsu threat, someone who has good wrestling defense, and someone who hits so hard. Now, Hernandez doesn't like being hit. He doesn't like being hit to the body. And I think if Rodrigues is clever, he'll mix up head strikes, body strikes. And I think just when he hits Hernandez, I think he'll quit in there. So I'm going to go Gregory Rodrigues. I think he'll probably get maybe an early finish. I'm going to go round 2, Gregory Rodrigues by KO. Guys, once again, sorry that this video came out late. Hope you enjoy it. Good luck tonight watching the UFC. Just give me a like and follow, please. It'd be great, even if you comment. I will do other things. I'm going to do a video on the top 5 UFC fights that I've watched. But yeah, enjoy your night, guys. Have a good weekend. Bye.